Hello and welcome to Trustworthy AI, de-risk adoption of AI in the enterprise and across other organizations as well. My name is Pamela Gupta and I'm your host. And as you know, we like to go into depth on how to demystify and de-risk AI adoption in a very in a lot of details and at a global level. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on building trust into AI-powered products. The title is also inclusive of the company that we are focusing on and for building this product, and that is the Marsh Captive Solutions story. The Weeks to minutes is the headline pretty much everyone is talking about when it comes to AI, right? And that's what we are hearing repeated out there. I want to start on a different side and a different perspective, which is the day this product was decided on how it's going to earn a regulator's trust before it had even gone to a single client, right? How that changed the equation and the conversation around building this uh, so that we can focus on what makes a product trustworthy, which is extremely important when it comes to adoption. I'm talking to Queena Cheung. Queena is the Chief Strategy and Digital Officer at Marsh Captive Solutions. She's leading ReadyCell and Captive Performance Companion products. And this conversation is really about what it takes to engineer trust into an AI product in a highly regulated industry. Welcome, Queena.
Thank you so much for having me today, Pamela.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything about your experience or your profile that I kept it really brief in the introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. I started my career in banking, so also extremely highly regulated environment, looking into risk control and risk transformation. And then I moved into my journey into the insurance industry, focusing on captive insurance. And my role now is really looking into what our customers needs, what our market needs, and leveraging digital transformation and AI to focus on giving clients a better experience and increasing operational excellence.
Nice. Really important conversation. I'm really looking forward to what we are going to be discussing today. So
Yeah.
let's start with the first at the outset. Let's go back to your early conversations about ReadyCell and Captive Companion.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the specific gaps in traditional captive information and ongoing management that you were looking to close out? And also, what made Gen AI the right tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So traditional captive formation is a very lengthy and manually intensive process. There are a lot of different types of documentation. There's isn't necessarily of they are not like forms that you fill in like every single time with the same format. Different companies can have different information comes in differently. Different regulators wants different informations differently, right? So when we're thinking about this type of operational friction, we want to redesign it, thinking about a way where we can make it smoother, both for for our colleagues, but also for our clients, so that the turnaround time for them to form a captive will be exponentially faster. So we started on the ReadyCell journey, thinking about what would that look like and what can that be? And that was really the very beginning of sparkling the idea of like what could be a ready cell. And very similarly for captive companion is like the really digital native type of experience that's not fully it's not fully there yet in the captive industry. There are a lot of documentation exchanges, there are a lot of institutional know-hows, and like trying to figuring out like the captive performance and how you compare yourself with your industry is very segmented processes that everyone has to go through, and we want it to be a one-stop shop where our clients and our colleagues will be looking at the same thing and have the full picture in your pocket. And that type of gap and expectations that we want to bring to our clients are the center of how we started thinking about ReadyCell and Captive Companion.
Okay. All right. So, what would you say, as you're going from, the voluminous information and from know-how to know what, right? Um, what stayed human even after the automation? In other words, what's the lesson about where AI is removing the friction versus where it's hiding it?
So, what AI really helps us is to empower our colleagues and to make the work faster and easier for them. What we don't want people to forget is we're not trying to eliminate the human judgment part of it. We still need the human's experience to look through everything to make sure that there is the accuracy that we need in our type of industry and our type of work. We have a lot of financial information. We cannot let it to be probabilistic. We're talking about financial statement that goes into the parent company, and some of them, if you're a public company, it will be part of your public company information. So we need to make sure it is accurate. And what we're doing here is to focus on making complex processes dramatically faster without compromising the trust element and the human accountability and control in it. And generative AI is very powerful, specifically with unstructured data. Previously, we have machine learning and very focused on structured data. We have analytical tools, we have robotic process automation. Everything is very deterministic. However, they are not very good with dealing with unstructured data. What generative AI brings us is this new element of being able to deal with unstructured data, going through reasoning to help us do some processes that are currently manual that our colleagues can do, but then our colleagues have the time to focus more on understanding the problem, evaluating the problem, making sure that everything is correct. But that human accountability and trust is extremely important to us when we're developing these products.
Right. So when you talk about compressing a process from weeks to minutes with ReadyCell,
Mhm.
that's pretty dramatic, right? So what would you say is technically the hardest part of making that stay real while keeping the experience trustworthy, right, for clients as well as for regulators?
Let me answer the regulator part first.
Okay.
For regulators, it is about transparency. We brought regulators on into our projects very early on to make sure that they understand what was the purpose, like why are we thinking about it, what we are trying to achieve, so that there's no surprise before you even give them the full proposal of what we're doing, so that they know like this is the direction we're going. Do you see any particular risks or concerns? We put it into consideration while we are building the prototype, building the processing. And then we brought out the regulator throughout the building process, letting them, comment into like what that, for example, what our calculations look like, what our principle looks like, so that that type of trust, and because of that type of transparency that we have with the regulator, we have built tremendous trust with them as well. This does not happen in one day. It's not just this product. We always make sure that we have a close relationship, a team relationship with our regulators. But on top of it is we don't miss that part of communication and making sure that, every step along the way, we are including the regulators into the conversation. And as we build it out, they understand what is included, what is expected of them, and how that process is going to change and beneficial for the different parties. So that in general, I would say is the most important part about working with regulator and not just giving them something. And on the other hand, in terms of colleagues and our clients, it is very similar. Like the whole transparency and bring them through the journey is something that is very much in my principle of executing any projects and executing any change management. When you look at your whole project in a journey type of situation, then you bring everyone along from the beginning to the end. And that beginning can be different stage, right? I have an idea. I'm not going to just run to the clients and run to the regulator, be like, hey, I have this idea, right? Like there's nothing yet, it's just this idea. Obviously, there are different steps of the way when we bring in the different stakeholders, but then is making sure that they are part of the journey, they understand, the pros and cons, the limitations, the benefits, and everything that is involved, and bringing it a long way so that when you have something that everyone has been doing it in the same way in such a long time, and you are changing how that is being processed and changing how the way, even like we're talking about changing the whole flow of how captive is being formed, those are the things that we need to make sure that that journey part is important when we are executing the project from start to end.
I'm wondering if you have any, like a concrete example of guardrails that may have been asked of you or that you put in proactively. I know you
From
definitely mentioned transparency, which I think is excellent, right?
So you're meaning some guardrails where we put in to achieve the trust from our stakeholders apart from transparency and communication?
Around as you're designing the product, right? As you're including that trustworthiness into the product, did you put in anything that was preventative that it doesn't stray out of the intended path? But we can come back to that. Let me ask you about, um, to continue on that regulatory uh, line of thought as to what secured conditional pre-approved regulatory licensing from, you had mentioned the DC Department of Insurance and Securities and Banking. That's a quite complex web, I would think, of, what those licensing requirements are. So how did you get the regulators comfortable with AI in that context?
The most important part is really about the transparency and the clarity. So when we're building, for example, the proprietary Marsh score, we have get we when the regulator understand what is involved into it, like what are the mechanisms that goes into the risk score calculations, what are the parts that is, AI, what are the parts that are that we uh, consolidate information, what is the part that it is, human, and what is the part that gives the final decision. Because one question that I get asked most nowadays is this being executed and finalized by an AI or an AI agent? Because our counterparties, whether it is auditors, regulators, or clients, what they have seen in the news about is probably like usually, while we have a lot of good news, we also see a lot of bad news, right? There are a lot of AI slop, or like you see AI language being part of the final output, which basically looks like, it was not being human reviewed and it's just automated, right? But when we are talking to regulators and getting the buy-ins, the most important part is getting them to see that clarity of the full processing, and then making sure that they understand which part comes with the human and where we make sure that the control is still in place, and be honest about what are the pros and cons.
That's excellent, right? I really like that because, and I'll tell you what I like about this. When most teams will treat regulators as a gate at the end of the process, and you are treating that as a design input and, you know, creating that as a part of where is that human in the loop and really creating that flow with the regulator apprised of what that flow looks like. So that's definitely something I like to call out for the audience as a pattern that you should be copying when you're talking about you know, creating a trustworthy design. All right, so where does the AI stop and the human decide in these products today? How do you communicate that boundary?
So for us, anything that is in this very simplest form, the highest level form, when I talk to my colleagues about it, is anything before final submission, it needs to be reviewed and confirmed by a human at this point in time. Our because of any well, let me repeat that for a second, is specifically on AI. Anything that has an AI component in helping to generate, you need to have the human to review before any final delivery and submission. No decisions are, especially on our clients' financials, are made and decided by an AI at this moment in time. Because right now we are still at the stage where we need to make sure that the accuracy is there. We are making sure that we understanding what's everything is going on before it goes into our clients' hands. With that being said, if we achieve AGI, if we have like eliminated the whole hallucination and the whole model building is not probabilistic, which is what all of our models are currently, maybe that will change. But in principle, we need to make sure that because these are our clients' financial information, the level of accuracy and the level of control is absolutely extremely important for us. And it needs the human judgment to make sure that we are comfortable with it before it gets into our clients' hands.
Great. What about explainability? Is there, and I know you mentioned accuracy and being able to keep a handle and a hand on what is being decided, what are the decisions, etc. I just want to call out one thing for the audience, which is that explainability is extremely important especially in the highly regulated space, and can mean different things to different stakeholders, So for engineers, for a regulator, for a client, for a data scientist, right? This will vary a lot by the audience and by the stakeholder. So it is really important to highlight that point that explainability is important again as a building block and not something that you try to go look for how to achieve that after the fact.
Absolutely. So any sort of research type of reports doesn't have to be a research paper, but if we're leveraging AI to consolidate some information and we're not giving the actual sources to start with, and we are actually asking the AI to pull information down, let's just say from internet and from different source, we always ask for the evidence of what that source and to check if that source is real before we finalize the answer. And that is really important, right? And also depends on what risk, but anything that goes into our clients' hands, anything that touches our clients' information, absolutely it has to do that. But if I'm if I am going into an AI chatbot and just asking, okay, how large do you think the screen of my computer is? And it doesn't have any risk component to it if it is an inch or two wrong, like sure, I'm not going to ask my colleagues to do those extra work. However, it is extremely important to us if it is impacting and has indirect impact to our actual deliverables. So that type of understanding the risk is also important for all of our colleagues to understand.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Now, Queena, you said that your AI model should be transparent, right? And align with ethical standards also. So not to put words in your mouth, but I think that goes with the territory. So when you're building trust into products and also building these products that are aligned with Marsh's broader AI portfolio, right? How do these principles then become concrete design and engineering decisions, right? That's where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, so at Marsh, very fortunately, we do have a centralized AI team who help with building the architecture of these models. So we don't build the foundation model ourselves. We leverage commercial models, but then we build guardrails. We have additional coding and controls over the specific model. There are guidance of like what the voices are, what is our ethical concerns, and what is our guidance. That is the whole all the guardrails that goes into our model use. So all the models, all the products we use leverage the models that are already pre guardrailed. So that is the extremely beneficial part from being a business line within an enterprise that allows me to actually save a lot of time on that. Like I don't have to worry about what like because everything, all the information will never go out of Marsh. So we don't have to worry about this. We are not training any of the models. We're not leveraging. A, none of the information goes out. B, we're not using any of the information to train any models, not internally, not externally. So that type of very safe environment, number one, makes my work probably 100 times easier than the teams that are actually building it, the March Central team that who are actually building those. But on top of that, all the agents that we build also have guardrails as well to ensure, for example, as simple as limiting a hallucination as much as possible. Not there could be agents where we have reference information. Let's just say that if we don't want the reference information to be shared with anyone who have access to that agent, how do we control it to make sure that it won't leak out by any type of hacking? Well, I mean, we have really good hackers out there using hacking models to hack but these are all internal agents that we're talking about within our control framework. So how do I make sure that the ethics or controls are here is we definitely rely on and leverage Marsh approves models and controlled models. Two is we definitely have sandboxing ourselves as well. So if there are any new processes that we are working on, we sandbox to make sure that it is working the way that we expect. Two is the agent what kind of controls that agent or permissions that agent can have or cannot have. We are very clear on that. And absolutely evaluations. And last but not the least is just as simple as prompting. We make sure that we have guardrails for every single one of our agents for specific use case as well.
I'm just curious that has there been any debate ever on a control or friction or reluctance that came about within the team or across, the business stakeholders or other teams who are part of the and we don't have to do that online. Maybe we can take that offline. But I'm just curious that, is this all very streamlined and easy to achieve when it comes to, because controls can become expensive in terms of time or in terms of resources, right? So is that something that you have come across, that the team said, no, we can't realistically put in this control or a guardrail with this time frame or with this amount of budget that we have allocated for this project?
Oh yeah, like trade-offs type of conversations and like our expectations of how much what type of access that an agent's supposed to have or not have are always part of the conversations, and there are always trade-offs, right? So the so on whether like you said, how much time it takes because we have to add those controls to build that product. There are a lot of conversation, and that's the part that I like in terms of the agile type of product development, because you continuously having those conversations. It's not just okay, I've set in mind I want to do A and then you go finish A, but it's more about this is the idea of the end that I want to get to, and as we are working towards it, what are the problems and trade-offs that we are seeing, and how do we still get to the final end with the controls or within the comfort zone that we are willing to accept. And that comfort zone can be like balanced out as well, right? You might have your hard limits, but within the hard limits, what are your soft gears that you're willing to make these trade-offs to create that product? It is a continuous conversation all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine because your team's using the trust but verify frame, for example, right, for human and AI collaboration, and there's going to be a lot of these that cannot be anticipated at the beginning, right, or going to be different by each product or each context or connotation. So as I guess my question is, as agentic AI expands, right, the capabilities expand, where do you think the boundary goes then? How it should move along, or stay still, right, when we come to this whole trust but verify conversation?
I think this is the million-dollar question. The we want as much of the repetitive operational type of manual work that can be more and more automated, but at the same time we want to make sure that everything is evidence, we have human in the loop. But if you have human in the loop every single part of the way, you are not necessarily simplifying anything. You might actually be just making it even more complicated, right? So there are there are definitely different approaches to do that. Like, first and foremost is looking at the risk. Everyone's processes have like low risk and high risk, like different type of risk level on within your operation. So which are the ones that you are more comfortable on the risk level if there were mistakes being made? Not saying that there would be it. Everyone is going to do evaluations, everyone is going to try, but it is an AI agent. Even if it is not an AI agent, it is a human. A human can make mistakes too, right? So, what are the different types of risks there are? What is your risk appetite? What are the controls that we can put into place? Is there any sort of like what type of evaluation you are doing too? Like how long you're doing the evaluation, how far you're doing the evaluation, what type of monitoring and feedback control that you have. It's going to be even more important going forward as we are more and more comfortable with AI agents doing certain level of tasks while maintaining the same level of accountability to the human without actually adding more work to human. It's going to be a complicated balance, I think.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this whole human in the loop for anything touching capital allocation, right? Or compliance or strategic risk to what, and risk in general, as you just mentioned, right? And it brings us to this point of continuous trust, right? How do you take and create these processes because it's not going to be a point in time, right? It's going to be on a continuous basis and it's going to change because that's just the very nature of AI, right?
Correct. So I would say the key point is confidence is earned. It doesn't matter it is a human or an AI-led operations, but then the confidence is earned over time. And it could be different for different processes, for different organizations. But I do think that in principle, it needs to be earned. And how it is might look different for anyone, but it doesn't come, like you said, at just one point in time.
Right, right. And when it comes to trust and we're talking about security as well, right? There's the threat environment, which is continuously changing, right? And things can materialize, which can happen quite fast, as we're seeing, right? So as it's going from, if the environment moves in hours, what does trustworthy mean? And how does one keep, their hand on that very strong point, right? How do you keep driving that trust? That becomes a challenge for anyone. And it's really, really important to highlight that. I'd like to do that for the audience that there's nothing static about this, right? This is a valiant objective, right? To have trust by design, build trust by design. And it is extremely context specific as well as technology specific. So, what would you say then in that context, then, or in that framing that I just did? What is your advice to a product leader in a regulated space such as yours about when to engage regulators, for example, in the build process, in the AI build process?
I would say engage early. Uh, Not as early as, like I said, not as early as when you like immediately when you have an idea, but when you have a somewhat polished idea of what you want to do, engage early, engage plainly, and like build that trust through the process with building with the regulator. And then I'm sure every single regulator is different. Some wants more higher touch points, some has lower touch points, but it's still the same thing. Um, is bringing them through the process and engaging them early to ensure that the trust is built early on. And depending on that process, the frequency could be different, the length would be different, but I believe that at least personally, I believe that a regulator would appreciate when you engage them early and in a reasonable manner. So with that human interactions, it also shows where the um, in a in a more regulated way, you can say that you're building the audit trail. But what that really means is building that journey again with the when you're building that journey, you bring in the stakeholders, and regulator is going to be one of your main stakeholders, and they are going to be your safety path as you are building it in a regulated area.
Yeah, I think one time you had mentioned that never surprise a regulator, and I think that's a quote I'm going to pull because that kind of sums it all up, Keep them alongside on the journey. So now we're going to the final segment, right? We're going to talk about taking a step back and taking a broader view of the picture and widening the lens, which is you're using AI to compress the build cycle, right? From weeks to minutes. And at the same time, your own colleagues actually at Guy Carpenter, right, which is a Marsh company, are warning about AIs that is compressing the attack cycle, that a flaw can go from discovery to weaponization within hours or even minutes from my experience. So same technology, but we're looking at the two different dimensions, right? Collapsing time on both ends, right? When time compresses like that on both ends, what can that do to trust, right? What does trust look like? So let me ask you a question more specific to you, what we've been talking. You had cited that 88% of organizations globally are using generative AI. In captive insurance specifically, what distinguishes the program using AI, right? Because you want to have that advantage, right? What distinguishes the program that is using AI well from ones that are still trying to see how to traverse this landscape?
Yeah, I think it's just, I think I can answer that more in general. It doesn't matter if it is a captive organization or not. Any organization that who are embracing AI now are going to be able to execute their innovation a lot faster. You can fail faster with minimal risk and minimal cost because just how much we are able to compress it in terms of time with AI. And you don't need, for example, you're building a product, you don't need to hire a team of engineers to help you build a prototype. You and I can go into a system, vibe code a prototype now that you don't have to worry about security, right? When you're vibe coding a prototype, you want to showcase that innovation to see whether it could work or not, and like getting feedback out of that. That is the biggest value that I see from an enterprise point of view. A lot of people have the business ideas and have the knowledge, the SMEs have the knowledge, have ideas, and if you embrace AI now, or you are already embracing AI, the capability to start realizing those innovations and being able to triage those and figure out which ones you want to scale, how do you prioritize, is so much easier than previously, and so much cheaper than previously. Where if organizations who are not embracing AI yet are not going to have that capability. Another personal view is that I do think that true creativity, true innovation stays within human. Again, at least with the models that we see in the public right now, the true creativity comes from human, and the AI models help us exemplified and amplified our capability 100-fold. On these type of creation needs to be seen by other people within our organization as well, and having that AI just helps to empower every of our colleagues to be an innovator themselves and to showcase their ideas more easily.
Okay. As we coming to the end and conclusion, what is the one thing you're watching in the next year or so that you believe is not being discussed today?
So agent to agent interaction. We hear about that a lot. We always talking about MCPs, having agent talking to an application and then agent talking to agents. I think this one is we hear a lot. We don't see as much as we hear them. And I expect that we'll be able to hear a lot and see a lot more. And also physical AI. We have seen a lot of how robots are learning, leveraging AI stimulation. I know this is not my industry specifically of what we do in captives, but it's one of the little hobbies that I like to focus on. Like some of my time reading the news is like, how are we leveraging AI models to help robots learn? and how robots are going to be able to do things and learn how to navigate physical environment a lot faster than like the traditional methodology, which are some of the things that I find very fascinating. That something that I, again, personally, I like to focus on, like getting to see in the next next year or two.
Yeah, certainly, speaking from, I too am very interested in that, where digital meets physical,
Yeah.
right? When it comes to robots and how it transforms the risk conversation. Um, and by the way, there are already regulations, existing regulations that apply to those scenarios, right? OSHA, for example, will, but I digress. All right. So, but in terms of robots and how that's going to change the risk equation, that's a really a, a very high focus area for me. So I'm very excited about maybe we can do another session on that. Definitely would love to go into more onto that.
Yeah,
So again,
absolutely.
with the just looking forward without getting into unreleased work, if you have any particular frontier besides physical AI and robots, what would you be working on? Or even let me change that a little bit to if, because we kind of covered that territory. If a young product leader wants to build AI using an AI-based product, an AI native product even, and is in the same very highly regulated industry such as yours, what is the one thing you would tell them, urge them to do, not even tell them, urge them to do to get it right from first step, right from day one?
Understand the information lineage and understand the expected limitation in terms of controls and auditability before you present your product. Doesn't mean that you have to build it out, but you have to understand that because at a highly regulated environment, people are going to always ask, how do you make sure that it is safe or guardrailed in different ways? If you do not have an answer for that, you're not going to be able to persuade people very easily. Again, I'm not saying that young product leaders needs to build that from day one. Absolutely not. But they have to understand that in a controlled, regulated environment, there are boundaries that we need to make sure that we fulfill. And that does not mean that processes can change. It does not mean that viewpoint can change. However, as an example, if I need to know the total amount of your premium, that cannot be wrong. And if I need to know where the money comes from and where the money went, those things are never going to go away regardless. You can change shape or form, even you talk about bank versus blockchain, but the idea of the traceability, the auditability, that type of need of control and review is not going away. So just don't forget that when you are building your next billion dollar product out there, and that will help you 10 times the um, engagement, I believe.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect end to the conversation about building trust by design and, creating a trustworthy AI product from start to finish, right? It's not only building it in, but also being able to demonstrate, at your latest point, right, that it has been built in and it's working as intended. So I'd like to thank you again, and it was a very, very good conversation. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much, Pamela, for inviting me. I keep forgetting to tell you that, these are all my personal opinion. It does not represent Marsh's opinion, but I really, appreciate you including me in today's conversation. It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.